You're running out of time. That is the message that Iran is now sending to the new White House. The Islamic regime is warning Biden's administration that it will not have an indefinite time period at its disposal to rejoin the 2015 nuclear deal between Tehran and the world powers. Iran also says it expects Washington to swiftly lift the crippling economic sanctions that Trump imposed on the country after pulling the U.S. out of the accord back in 2018. And joining us now is Behnam Ben Taleblu, a senior analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, to break this all down. So first of all, has Trump's maximum pressure plan against Iran worked? What would you say?
Well, great to be back with you. In short, I would say yes, because it's largely a policy of economic coercion, punishment, and deterrence. And if you look at basically any macroeconomic indicator in the Iranian economy, which is the value of the rial, oil exports, inflation in the country, stagflation in the country even sometimes, it's been effective. Has it driven the regime to do the thing that Washington wants it to do ultimately, strategically, which is to come to the table for a comprehensive change in its foreign and security policy? No, it hasn't. But then again, it only had about a year and a half, 2 years time max to accomplish unilaterally what took previously, I think, 10 years multilaterally to do. So I think it did need more time.
How should Biden be taking these threats from Iran right now? Does his administration feel a hurry to take action?
Well, something very interesting happening now with the Biden nominees that we're seeing testifying and increasingly getting confirmed is that some of them are saying that there is no need to rush back, that they're not looking to immediately do a 180, though they have said good things about the JCPOA, though they have been disdainful about maximum pressure. They do understand that there are a universe of other national security priorities besides Iran. And I think these Iranian statements are a response to the comments by those nominees. Lest we forget, Iran is not only escalating in the region. We're seeing alleged Shia militia attacks in Iraq against our partners in the region, such as Saudi Arabia. But also, of course, we're seeing Iran go to 20% enrichment at an underground military bunker at Fordo. They're doing all these things to basically create leverage to kind of get the Biden administration to rush back into the deal. And statements like what Zarif said are really the icing on that cake.
At this point, does Iran have any leverage over the United States?
Well, in the weirdest way, the Islamic Republic is looking like it's going to be weaponizing our risk aversion in the region and our responsibility. Obviously, the U.S. is risk averse. It doesn't want to start any of the wars in the region. It also wants a diplomatic win when it comes to the Iran issue, particularly in regard to the years of maximum pressure, where it was more process and in some places results, but in some places process, because, again, the Iranians didn't come to the table yet. So in this way, the Iranians are hoping to weaponize these forces against Washington. And I think Washington needs to resist that temptation to try to put out every single fire, let the sanctions, even though they are the Trump maximum pressure sanctions, to keep working, because lest we forget, every single sanction is not political. It's rooted in proven Iranian bad behavior, nuclear, terrorism, missile, or otherwise. And these sanctions can actually ultimately be Washington's leverage against Iran to push back on all of Iran's leverage against Washington.
Now, let's break down the Iran nuclear deal, because we speak about this so often, but why did Trump leave it, and why is his role so critical of it? And what is the alternative here?
Well, it's worth remembering that Trump, when he was campaigning to be president in 2015-16, was one of the few Republicans who didn't say on day one, I'll leave the deal. And indeed, it took about a year and a half for the president to ultimately leave the deal. He tried to fix the deal first. He tried to develop a comprehensive Iran policy first. But he left the deal because he basically said it was an unfair trade, meaning that which the U.S. gave up, its economic sanctions pressure, was not worth the limited and time-based nuclear concessions that the Islamic Republic gave. He basically said it's a lopsided deal. And since leaving that deal on May 8th, 2018, he did use these primarily largely unilateral economic sanctions to punish the Iranian economy and to try to make it harder for the Islamic Republic to conduct its foreign policy. And the first year of that policy, the Iranians thought, Trump would fail. But as the Iranian economy really began to tank, the Iranians began to lash out, doing what they were already doing, such as terrorism, support for proxies in the region, missile testing, but on a higher level, so as to spook the administration into upending this policy. As we see during the last days of the Trump presidency, he continued with this policy. And so you can say he wasn't spooked. The question is, will all of this escalation by Iran spook the incoming Biden national security team, which is developing their Iran policy as we speak?
Right. So, Biden has pledged to return to the nuclear deal. We've covered this several times, but there has yet to be any communication, as far as we know, between Iran and Biden on the subject. How would the U.S. be able to, do that effectively, go back into this deal while simultaneously appeasing Israel?
Well, I think that the key is not to look at it as appeasement or anything, but to work with our partners and allies. The key is that in the year since Trump left the deal, even the Europeans have been critical of some of Iranian bad behavior. So it's to build bridges, build coalitions. And if the U.S. does go back into some sort of an agreement, because I think that if you go back into the JCPOA, particularly an unfixed JCPOA, it would just be a strategic win for the Iranians here. What Washington should do is build these bridges with Israel, with some of the Gulf Arabs, and particularly with the Europeans who remain in the deal, to talk about the fatal flaws, to talk about the fixes, to talk about what is worth and isn't worth sanctions relief, and then broaden out that conversation to the Russians and Chinese, and then ultimately present that to the Iranians.